All right, what's up, everybody? Welcome to Frank Analysis. I'm your host, Franco. I'm pleased to be joined back to the show again for a third time. Seb Solomon, aka Red Sea Cactus on Twitter, aka Red Sea Socialist on YouTube. Thank you very much for being here, Red Sea. And you guys
Thank you.
read the title, so you guys know we're going to talk about Syria and Eritrea and the importance of nuance in truth telling. So, Seb, thank you very much for being here. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me back. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah, so we're going to talk about an article that Sebs wrote. She's a journalist. She's an independent journalist, so she writes for the Solar Tsunami on Medium, right? So you want to tell us a little bit about how you decided to get started with writing? How long have you been doing it?
Yeah,
And what motivated you?
sure. Well, as far as just writing goes, I kind of keep like my own personal like summaries of things that happen, my own like analysis of how I observe things and stuff like that, just for myself. And I realized like, well, why don't I just put this out there? Like,
Mm-hmm.
not in so much of like a, well, this is how it is, but just my interpretation of things. So a lot of the stuff that I have been putting down or putting up, it's stuff that I've either like been thinking about and like writing about casually for myself. Just it helps me understand when I write things down. My just personally, just like not a diary, but just kind of like a journal type thing. And I was like, well, I can polish things up and um, add more sources and put it out, and people can read it if they want. So that's kind of how that came about. And it was actually because I would talk to Philmon all the time about different things that are happening, and whether it be like politics or what have you. And he was like, well, why don't you just make a blog or, something like that, and just like put your ideas out there since you have so many opinions. Uh, so that's kind of how that transpired.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
I felt like there's a lot of personal stuff that you wrote there. Like there was I could feel like some that you were letting out some emotions in your most recent article that we're going to discuss here. Let
Yeah.
me share that for people so they can see. So you you start off by first thanking people, giving people shout outs like Firel of the Convo Couch, Ali Alexandra, the two gentlemen from the Yellow Brick Road, and you also talk about your experience in Eritrea and why that issue is so important for you. So you were born there,
Mm-hmm.
right? And
Mm-hmm.
so you wanna tell us a little bit about that? Why should people educate themselves more about what's happening in Eritrea
Yeah.
and what?
So
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
no, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh no,
I
that
didn't
was
mean to
it.
cut you off.
That was the entire question.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So yeah. So the reason why I even wrote um, this particular piece is because just I've just been noticing a lot as Eritrea has been in the news and Ethiopia. I have been noticing that there has been a little bit of lack of nuance as far as discussing Eritrea in particular, because and I get it because you don't want to seem like you're the one repeating like State Department talking points, right?
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, as far as the internal stuff going on in Eritrea, I do have personal experience as far as like I was born there, raised there until I was about 7, and then as I write in the piece, we did have to leave very abruptly because there was turmoil that was going on. Some of it that was stoked by the State Department as far as like just creating issues between Ethiopia and Eritrea, but there was a lot of it that was also that could be put on the Eritrean government. So it's it just so I guess like it kind of it was actually a conversation that I was having with Anthony because he sent me like a clip or something of I forgot who it was, but no, it was Rania and Danny Haifong talking about it, and it was nothing bad. Um, but I remembered the other segment that I watched on Ethiopia, where Eugene and Rania were talking about what was going on in Ethiopia with Tigray, TPLF, and they covered it really well as far as Ethiopia. But then they got to Eritrea, and they started talking about how the regime is just, is pretty strong, and some people who just happen to oppose it, they didn't like the government anymore because they were a strong regime. So that's why a lot of people left or have complaints about Eritrea. And that kind of struck a little bit of a nerve with me. Not so much in like, I don't think they did it on purpose to like be hurtful to the people that may have had to leave for internal reasons. But because I do know where they're getting that sort of talking point from, because I have noticed that a lot of the people that have been getting like airtime to talk about this particular issue, especially from the Eritrean perspective, have been pro-government. I see it's really tricky because at that point you're just essentially doing propaganda for the government, and you are kind of rejecting like anything that might be of value that the people who oppose the PFDJ, which is the Eritrean government, but you're kind of like leaving out those people's voices and just listening to the pro-government and giving that view. And that's problematic because not only is that's lacking in nuance, but it's also it's kind of disrespectful to the people that have had to leave or have had problems that were beyond just like, oh, well, this is just a strong regime. Like that's why they left. Where like people have like been thrown in prison, arbitrarily, without having any trial or just disappeared. One of whom happens to be my uncle. So, and I'm not saying that that's the experience that everyone had, right, or has with the Eritrean government. And I don't resent those people, and I don't ever want it to be taken that way, because that's not where I'm coming from. However, I do think that you have to show, regardless of like the propaganda that the State Department or NATO and all that, like regardless of that propaganda that they're like constantly just like throwing at you, you can't, because you want to defend certain regions from that, you can't just like completely disregard the internal stuff as well. I can't just be like, well, we'll talk about that later, or like, well, that's not the big thing, because it's like, no, they're both equally as important, because there are a lot of political prisoners, and if you stand with political prisoners, and you talk about Assange or you talk about Mumia, then you can't just say, oh, it's just a strong regime. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
that was kind of a long-winded answer, but
yeah. Of course, you're anti-imperialist, and we, as some of the viewers may know, Rania, and she was speaking to Kevin Gostola, right?
It was so there was that one, but there was another one on her and Eugene's show on Breakthrough News. I think that's what it's called.
They also are anti-imperialists, right? They've had done great work, exposing what the U.S. does to other countries. But like you said, there's nuance, right? So just because the U.S. is trying to take control of a country doesn't mean like if the country takes over that region that they're going to be, this great government.
Yeah.
And you certainly don't align with NATO. You don't align with
absolutely.
the TYT narrative or any of those, synthetic leftists at all.
Absolutely not.
Right.
Yeah. Not coming from that angle at all. It's just like, I'm not coming from that angle, but I also do not approve of, or approve is the wrong word, but I oppose the government of Eritrea as it stands, and the way that it's been centralized, and the fact that the people there can't even really, they feel like they can't even really speak out against the government, as for retaliation reasons. So it's very unfortunate, and a lot of it, I understand why they do want to have a standing army, because they feel like they're kind of under attack all the time, whether it be through like Ethiopia, because what happened before. I do understand that, but I mean, I didn't include this in what I wrote. But another thing is, if you advocate for Yemen, then you would have a problem with Isaias, because he was allowing the UAE to use a base in southern Eritrea called Asab. He was allowing them the UAE to use that base to drone the Houthis in Yemen. So to me, it's like because he's pretty close with the Arab League. I think Eritrea is like a sitting member or an observing member. So it's just, to me, it's like, so you can't advocate, you can't say, oh, it's a strong regime, and some people oppose it, and then go ahead and advocate for what's going on to the people, and the Houthis in Yemen. It just doesn't make any sense because he allowed that. I'm not saying that that they weren't attacking them anyway, but he did a lot. Like you added to it, you didn't subtract from it. So to me, it's like he's not necessarily an anti-imperialist. You know what I'm saying? It doesn't mean that he needs to be overthrown by outside forces. Absolutely not. It has to come from within Eritrea. Like it has to. I will never ever say like no, just let the NGOs in. Africa. We just need a base for the U.S. in Eritrea. I'm not coming from that point of view, but I am coming from the point of view that he is not the right person to be leading the people inside of Eritrea, and not offering that part of the analysis is flawed. So,
and it's like for people who can I guess correct me if this isn't a good comparison, but they can think of it as like, we don't want the U.S. to intervene in any country. Mm-hmm. We don't support the U.S. involvement in Afghanistan, but that doesn't mean that we support the Taliban, right? Because look at what they do to their women, what their beliefs are. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of like that, right? Yeah,
like similar to that, exactly. I think there's just nuance, exactly. Yeah. But because you don't support that, right? Because you don't, especially if they don't want to wear a hijab, or they don't want to live in that type of environment, and they're being forced to. You don't want that, and there's a lot of people that in Eritrea that don't want to serve in the military, and it's illegal to not want to serve. It's kind of similar to Israel, where it's like you have to you have to do what is it called, the military whatever, your time, serve time in the army. It's mandatory after you turn 18. So it's well, how about what is it, conscientious dissenter or whatever it's called? What if you don't want to do that, and you go to jail? So it's it's not exactly a beacon of freedom for people. And I just think that it's important to understand that part, because but like I said, it just has to come from inside of Eritrea. It cannot come from Sweden, from England, from US. It can't, because it has nothing to do with them. It would have to be from within Eritrea. But I think that it is just it's a disservice to paint it as a place that I don't know, as some socialist beacon of hope in the Horn of Africa, because it's not, quite frankly. So
yeah. So how would you say journalists who are anti-imperialists can approach this differently going forward when it comes to countries like Eritrea or other countries that are going through their struggle, where they have a government that's can be oppressive, but then there's the U.S. that has its interests, or another Western country that has its interests, or another powerful country that has its interests, that wants to get involved because they want to obtain some resources from that country. How would you say that they should approach this better? What are some ways, some tips you'd give them, before you talk about it, interview some of the people there, or the prisoners of that country? What would you say?
I would say probably just at least acknowledge it, or maybe I would say Philmon is probably one of the best sources as far as analyzing the whole thing from a historical point of view, because he has extensive knowledge of the government and exactly how it came together, and the National Assembly and all that, and he has and he knows about the political prisoner situation and stuff as well. So I think that maybe you can have the pro-government people perspective as well. You can have both. I just think that it's okay to have both. It's not a crime to point out some of the negative things that might be taking place, whether it be in Eritrea or in Ethiopia with Abiy and his his neoliberal policies, right? It's it's okay regardless of whether or not they're getting attacked by NATO with the propaganda. I get it. You want to fight that too, but you don't have to do it not in a dishonest way, but you don't have to leave things out in order to not conflict with your narrative. Because it's about truth, right? It's not about selling a narrative. Because if that's the case, then you're mainstream media. if you're leaving things out in order to make a point, like you have to address all of it, all the ugly
or
stuff.
being biased, right? Or
Exactly.
too biased.
Too biased,
Yeah.
yeah. And it's okay. Some people might like the government, right? And you can say that perspective as well, and that's fine. But you shouldn't demonize the people that might have something different to say about the government as like, oh, well, that's just CIA talking points, or like, oh, well, you're just a useful idiot for NATO. It's like, actually, no. Like that's pretty rude and incorrect. So.
Right. There's nuance there. Just because you don't support a government from a country in the global south doesn't mean that you support NATO.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely.
So, just to give some people just some more historical background here, how was Eritrea born? How was Eritrea formed? Like, it used to be a part of Ethiopia, right? How did it become an independent country?
So not necessarily. So Ethiopia itself is kind of it's spun out of the Abyssinian Empire, which was I guess it became Ethiopia in about 1891. But it was the Abyssinian Empire, which was like led by Menelik II, who had a lot of support from the British and the French. The Italians were also involved, but they were more the northern part with King Johannes, which was Eritrea technically. So technically, Eritrea was never part of Ethiopia. It was just more of like it was acquired. Like it was just like a lot of the different regions in Ethiopia that were never part of like the whole of what you would call Ethiopia modern day. They were their own tribes, right? Like the Ogaden region, or like the what it's called, the Amharas, the different sides. They were not, or the Tigray, all of them. Like they weren't just it wasn't just all like a unified Ethiopia. It was Menelik, and he came and conquered and tried to Christianize and enslaved. So it's, to me, it's like when you talk about empire, you can't glorify it just because they're black. Like, if you know what I mean, like, because there's this weird, like, oh, well, Haile Selassie and Menelik, like, just, I don't know, like glorifying or like kind of being like idealistic about what that was. And it's like, no, that was just repression. So you want this master instead of this master? How about no master? Like, so I think we have to be a little bit honest about what that was. And some people will say, well, he was trying to unify them in order to have like a strong bloc or something, against the imperialists. It's like, but he was working with them. He was working directly, getting weapons from the French, or getting money for weapons from the French and the English. So it's like, like it's just like, was this really like a revolutionary thing, like they like to tell us, or like, are we just not being honest with ourselves? Are we glorifying something that we shouldn't? Because if you're against corruption and you're against imperialism and exploitation, it shouldn't matter if it's coming from Europe or from your own people. It's not okay, and you should denounce it and don't glorify it, and don't just kind of brush it under the rug as like it's like, oh well, that's just the past. It's like, okay, and that's fine too, but it's good to understand it. But just to answer your question, so that's how Ethiopia formed, right? So Eritrea was part of that, but it was never really like Ethiopia was it's, I'm not saying it's a fake country, but it just kind of came together in that way. So when people say like, oh well, Eritrea was a part of Ethiopia and then you guys left, it's like, no, it was never really a part of it. It was acquired, but it wasn't like a, and then there was a 30 years of war to not be a part of Ethiopia. So and that's where both my parents fought. So that they were fighting the Derg regime in Ethiopia. So that they got independence about 1991. So that's how that formed.
Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
And
sure.
Switching gears here to Syria, in your article, you brought up somebody that I've had on this show before, journalist Kavark Al-Masian from Syrian Analysis.
Mm-hmm.
And you brought up something that I didn't ask him about because I wasn't fully aware of this information. And when I have him on, I'll ask him about it. I still think that he presents information that we can we can learn from about what's happening in that region. But you can let us know, like, what was it that you felt like you had to write about it in your article?
Mm-hmm. So I mentioned that because I was trying to, I wanted to write about the Eritrea thing, but then I wanted to kind of incorporate that because not necessarily because he went on your show, but because I had known about this before anyway, but because he went on your show, it just came. I don't know. It just like it entered into my realm, I guess, or like my sphere where like I'm around a lot more than I guess me going out and looking for it. So I wanted to make that comparison because it does feel like even with Syria, there are certain types of people that tend to be the experts on Syria, right? And I'm not saying that they don't do good work. I'm not saying that they don't mean well or that they're vicious people or anything like that. But specifically with Kevork, he is someone that a lot of people refer to for analysis on Syria, which is fine. Like, and he's pro-Assad, which is fine. I don't have a problem with that. And I'm not even necessarily comparing Assad to Isaias. Like two different people, and Eritrea and Syria have two different histories, all of that. What I did have a problem with was the way that he was presenting the Syrian refugees that were going into Germany, because that's where he was. And I watched, I think it was one of the videos, it was an AfD, German alternative party, that has a platform of anti-immigration and anti-refugee. I guess he works with them. He does like media for them or something. But he was at one of their meetings and he was speaking. He gave like a 20-minute speech or something like that. And it was very alarming what he was saying. And he's repeated it after that as well, even during or in his videos on his channel. But the video essentially was saying he was telling the people in Germany that they should do something about the refugees that are coming in from Syria, because a lot of them are either terrorists or terrorist sympathizers, and that the liberals are trying to make Germany into another failed state like Syria. So they better, do something about it before one of them blows up a train station in Germany. And it's like, when you generalize a whole group of people like that, that's because now I have to look at your character, like what's going on. Like your analysis might be great, your information might be accurate and stuff. However, if this is how you're kind of framing the refugee crisis, that was, of course, spurred by the fact that the U.S. or NATO had targeted Syria, which is I'm not over here saying oh, that's not really how it happened. No, clearly that's how it happened, and clearly they do fund radical extremists and stuff, right? But when you're talking about refugees who had to leave their homes and go to different countries all over the world, which is huge. Like in Syria, it was huge. They were everywhere. There's Syrian refugees in Ethiopia. They're everywhere. It's to kind of group everybody as these the Muslim Syrian refugees, they could be Islamists, or they might be sympathizing with terrorists. So the Germans need to do something about this. And the only people that are complaining about the Germans what did he say? It was something like there was a lot of things that were said. I think I made bullet points of it, but the general thing was he had a lot of criticism of the way that the Syrian refugees were behaving in Germany and how they were making the Syrians look bad, like the rest of the Syrians, the ones that weren't terrorist sympathizers or terrorists themselves. This is the problematic trope, because if you're gonna and you're speaking to the German people and you're saying that this is the problem, as if Germany doesn't have any problems with crime that other people haven't committed, that it's just the Syrian refugees that happen to be Islamist sympathizers, they're gonna come in and blow up your train stations. It's crazy. When you're making generalizations like that, it's so dangerous. It's so dangerous. This has happened before. We've seen this before. And I'm not over here saying, oh, he's a fascist or whatever, but it's just, and maybe he has his own reasons for why he's saying that. But when you do, just remember where that logic leads, because then at that point, you're just you're predictive policing. You're saying oh, well, it's more likely that these people are going to do this. And it's okay, well, isn't that the same thing that Trump said, when he came down the escalator and said Mexicans or immigrants are rapists and drug dealers and criminals, or what Joe Biden said for the 1994 crime bill, the speech that he gave on the Senate floor, where he's oh, they have no structure, kids born out of wedlock, they're going to be predators on the street. We need to do something now. It's that's very problematic if you're coming from that angle, because then I have to make a character like analysis of you, and I have to kind of question the things that you say, because that logic is it leads to somewhere really dark, and yeah, so
Yeah, yeah, I
that's
do
kind of
think
why I
it's
made that comparison.
yeah, I do think like if somebody says something that's like problematic, regardless of the objective information that they present, that's still something to consider, about the person, and think if like that's going to influence how they present their information. Like, will it be biased? So it's just something people should consider. Like, you can find truths anywhere. You can
Mm-hmm.
find a lot of truths with people who are really objective with how they present information.
Mm-hmm.
But it's just, take some things, like for what it is. And
Yeah,
always question. You got to question everything that you get from people. Like, just
absolutely.
because if you arrive to like the most objective, I don't know, like you look at all the documents that are being presented, you feel like you have a good understanding of everything that's happening. It's still just only the information that you came across. There
Mm-hmm.
could be other information out there that that you have yet to come across.
Mm-hmm.
So the journey to informing yourself never ends. But also, I'll ask Kavork about this to see if
Yeah,
he's evolved or his
yeah.
reasoning for why he said that. Because I know that in Germany and in the UK and other countries in Europe, there's a lot of mainstream uh, pressure on like Arab immigrants and refugees, and trying to
Mm-hmm.
group them all together. So I don't know if that kind of influenced him to say that, and he wasn't thinking about how it's just like it's generalizing a group of people.
Yeah, he was. I mean, and then he was
I'll
also saying like the people that have a problem, that are like problem fitting in, like the Syrians who are having problems fitting in, are just not wanting to learn the German culture and the norms and assimilate and learn the German language. Like that's why they're having psychological problems. And it's like, bro, are you kidding me right now? Like people had to move from like a completely different place to another place, like just like in a war torn place. Yes, caused by the by NATO itself, but it's like you can't just say like, oh well, they're just having problems because they don't want to assimilate. I don't have a problem. Look at me, I'm doing great. It's like, dude, you know what I'm saying? It's like maybe their psychological issues that they're having have more to do with the fact that they I don't know, they're in a new place, and maybe they lost family members, and there's like a whole factor of things. It's not just like, oh well, they just can't fit into the norms. I mean, like what if I was here saying, oh, well, they just need to learn English. Like, I mean, I did it. Look at me. Like, it's just, I wouldn't do that. Like, it's like devoid of any compassion or like empathy for human beings, you know? And and you can't leave that part out. You cannot leave that part out. That's the most important part. Then why do you do what you do? You know, it's like, why do you, then why do you even care about politics? If you don't give a shit about people, or if you're just going to like generalize them and, make talking points to fit exactly what you're saying. It's like, I mean, like he works with AFD, which is like an alternative. They call themselves, right wing, whatever party, and their whole platform is anti-refugees and anti-immigration. So that's a little weird. That'd be weird if I was working, if I'm saying like, yeah, I totally, I'm against all these wars and I'm against this happening and that and blah blah blah. But then I'm like doing this like culture war bullshit. Like for what? Like what? Because then you say you want to build coalitions, but how are people going to want to build coalitions with you if they feel like you're completely dismissing their plight? And it's not. This is not me being woke or liberal. And people need to stop saying that to people just because they're saying something a little bit different that doesn't exactly align with what they think. It doesn't mean that the person is woke. It's like me or somebody, a white person, like criticizing Obama, and then I'm like, oh, you're a white supremacist. It's stupid. It's really stupid, and it's lazy. It's just that's where I'm at.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I understand where you're coming from. So my next question is about like just about all journalists and pundits, because everyone's going to have their issues,
Mm-hmm.
and we can get truths from anywhere. Like I mentioned earlier, like for example, Tucker Carlson may say some factual things on his show doesn't mean that you endorse, that you like that you love him overall as a person. Doesn't mean that you agree with everything that he says. Doesn't mean that he is going to present some information that's, that's not true.
Hmm.
But if there's something that's subjective that he's presenting that can be backed up by evidence, I mean, we can take it for what it is. It's information. Information is information.
Hmm.
And but I mean, clearly there's still going to be, I think, journalists and pundits that are the best at what they do, and that really mean well, when
Hmm.
they present information. So I just wanted to ask you, what kind of journalists or pundits do you recommend to people where they can get the most information out of? Or do you
Well,
say just get information anywhere?
yeah,
Uh,
I think it's
yeah.
okay to take information from anywhere, but like just don't forget your like I don't know your morals or your principles or your ethics. Don't demonize like whole groups of people. I mean, it's the same thing as like what is it? They were the so quote unquote liberals saying everyone that was at the January 6th protest was a fascist, right? It was like an upright, like it was all these the white rage that Trump stoked, and then they went to take over the Capitol. It's like that's bullshit. That's not what happened. Like let's be real. I don't.
Mm-hmm.
I that's not. Yeah, that's not exactly what happened. So it's just like you wouldn't take that seriously, right? So it's like
Mm-hmm.
at the same time, you don't want to be like, oh well, yeah, like all these Islamists from Syria that are funded, that are being funneled into Germany. They're gonna mess up the country. Do something about your country, like before one of these people blows a train station up. So it's just that's all that I was trying to get at. It wasn't like um, I wasn't trying to be I'm not trying to be what is it called? What do they call me? Woke. Like I'm
Mm-hmm.
not which is also kind of insulting. It's like you can't just dismiss someone as woke just because you don't agree with what they said. But yeah. So just a disclaimer though, I'm not coming from like a woke liberal place. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but like you said, it's just I think you can get your information anywhere. But if you remain with if you keep your values and your just your objective way of looking at things and your ethics essentially, then I don't think I think you can get information from anywhere, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like it doesn't even matter. It could be Fox News. I mean, you should also take into account like, well, okay, like from what we know about Fox News, it's owned and operated by Rupert Murdoch. Like, don't you think that
Mm-hmm.
there's probably a reason why they let certain things slide and maybe certain things not? Like, there's a motive there. I'm not saying that every
And
single who comes on there is aware of the motives and it's like a huge conspiracy like that. All I'm
yeah.
saying is like we just have to ask these questions, especially with the network like owned by Murdoch, which is like one of the biggest like news like there was I think he owns Sky News too and a couple other ones.
Yeah.
So yeah, we're not
Plus,
exactly talking
mainstream
about
news is
yeah
plus mainstream news by design is like a limited hangout. Like they're
yeah.
going to present enough news of some people that's like objective, but
Hmm.
then give a whole bunch of other news that'll keep them thinking that the enemy is their neighbor who
Yeah.
watches CNN or MSNBC, right?
Well, I mean,
And
like
then
let's be
they're
honest.
they're going to do the
Yeah,
same thing about
they,
Fox News
they
viewers.
they are, and it's like yeah,
Yeah.
okay. So Tucker might have Jimmy on a couple times, right? I'm not going to say Glenn because I don't even. To me, Glenn, no offense, Glenn Greenwald is worthless to me, my opinion. But
Hmm.
just because all the contradictions, whatever, I have my own issues with Glenn Greenwald. But yeah, just because he'll let Jimmy come on and say a couple things, right? And then the rest of the week, what does he do? Antifa, like Antifa's like hiding under your bed in your closet, like BLM is coming for your kids. They're going to indoctrinate them with critical race theory, and it's like, okay, I understand the problems with critical race theory, and I get it. I know why people have an issue with it, but like, is that really the main issue? And also, like, hasn't school always been an indoctrination like institution? Like why
Hmm.
now? Why is it now that all of a sudden it's a problem? It's always been a problem. It's terrible. So it's just like give me a break with like the social just like the woke mob and like the radical left Antifa. It's like that's also just as divisive as those quote unquote liberals saying the white supremacists and the fascist Nazi sympathizers are gonna, you know, attack. I don't know. Like it's the same. It's like two sides of the same coin essentially. So it's like cool. Like he's had Jimmy on to talk about this, that, and the other. But then the rest of the time, Tucker, like, what are you talking about?
Yeah. And
Like,
yeah, yeah, for sure. And I just want to just to clarify, because Barrett Brown, who I had on, whistleblower Barrett Brown, he also mentioned, shared the same opinion as you about
Mhm.
Glenn Greenwald, that he thinks he's worthless. He
Yeah.
explained his reasons, and I just want to give people a disclaimer, like, I'm learning as I go. Like, I don't know everything about Glenn Greenwald. I take the information that he says, like, if it's objective, I'll accept it, I'll take it, right?
Hmm.
If newer information arises that gives, more to this, to the information that he presented, I'll accept that too. So I just want to hear from you. What are your reasons for why you think Glenn
Oh,
Greenwald is
Glenn.
worthless?
I think
Yeah.
he operates on like this weird, like just but specifically it's a lot of the stuff that he's written before where he said like where he's talking about whether it be like South America, specifically I think Cuba he was talking about, and Brazil, and I think one other country where he was saying like, oh well, you can't really take these radical like these Fidel Castro sympathizers seriously. Just
Mm.
kind of bashing like the global South. I don't have the articles with me right now, but if you read some of his older stuff on like how he actually viewed people in these Latin American countries who maybe called themselves socialist or whatever, and he has every right to say whatever he wants, but it's like it's the way that he was saying it was a little problematic, just
Mm.
as far as like his analysis of it, and how, because a lot of the South Americans were saying that they didn't understand this war on terror, right? So well they just don't get it because they don't understand that America's under attack. Like Bush did what he had to do. He did say this. So I know that Glenn likes to say that he has always been against the Iraq War or whatever, but that is not true because he did at one point say, well, yeah, well, Bush did what he had to do. Like that's just what it is. Like we can't let them come to America and attack us. Like they just don't
Mm.
understand it in South America because it doesn't involve them, type of thing. Where it's like, uh, I'm sorry, what?
So you,
Like,
you
what are
think
you?
he naturally evolved from those issues, or you think that this is just a common characteristic of him?
I think it's a common characteristic of him. I think he likes to pick and choose different things that he'll stand up for. Because now, what he's on the like, well, Antifa's doing this, and well, I'm just being a journalist. I'm just being,
Mm.
I'm just trying to remain objective. But he's always been kind of like in my opinion, he either I don't know if it's disingenuous, dishonest, or just poor takes, like very poor takes. I really don't like to
Mm.
give him a lot of credit because he's also never explained anything he said in the past before. People just kind of brush it under the rug as like, you know, just, and then also, I mean, not to mention like The Intercept being pretty much like a honeypot that has put many people in jail. So
Which I
it's,
discussed with Ryan Grimm earlier
oh, okay.
about, yeah, I brought up Reality Winner, Daniel
Mm-hmm.
Hale, Terry
Okay.
Albury. I was like, how
Mm-hmm.
can you still work for an institution like this? Is it safe for whistleblowers given this track record?
Mm-hmm.
And I asked him, I was like, are you going to look into Piero Midyar? Because I showed him the Whitney Webb article telling him how these are the things that Piero Midyar has said before about whistleblowers before the Intercept was created. So how can a whistleblower feel safe giving information to a journal outlet that's owned by this guy who has said he doesn't like whistleblowers? Um,
Yeah,
so
it's interesting.
I'll
And
be
then now he
curious to
works
see.
for, because now he moved to Rumble. Glenn Greenwald. He
Oh,
moved to
Glenn
Rumble,
Greenwald, yeah.
which is which I think Peter Thiel is an investor.
That's
So it's
important to
like,
point out because I talked about Rumble, with Shadow Band and
mhm.
Charles and Marcus. I didn't know it was owned by Peter Thiel at the time.
Oh no, I
I
don't think it's
just
owned
don't.
by him. I think
Yeah,
he's just like he's kind of leading the way. Like he's investing in it,
yeah.
and I think on Rumble you're not even allowed to talk. Like you're not allowed to disparage people that also are on Rumble. So like you can't
Mm,
say anything bad about someone like a content creator in Rumble, which is kind of odd. It's like,
mm,
is that free speech? I'm sorry, because it's like you can say all day long, like, oh well, we just need to be worried about the people at the top, right? Like just the 1% at the top. Okay, like that's fine, absolutely, I'm with you there. However, if there is something wrong with the people that are right next to us, maybe like just like a tier, like as far as like influence goes, like platform, um, criticizing them doesn't mean that you're doing a disservice to the movement against the
mm,
the 1% at all. Like it's, and also criticizing someone is not smearing. It's not the same thing. It's
mm,
not attacking, especially if it's coming from in good faith. So
Yeah, smearing would be if you bring up exaggerate information, or you give misinformation about a person. Um, so yeah, that would be smearing. Like if you're
yeah,
being dishonest about a person's credibility.
yeah.
And so he moved on. Glenn Greenwald moved on from The Intercept. He's now on Substack. But
Hmm.
you still think he's worthless?
I
So
mean,
I
I just
just
don't
want to
really.
see.
He hasn't
Oh
done
no, I
anything
just
for
wanted to
me.
ask,
Yeah,
like, if
yeah.
you think he is, so then you might think that there's someone filling in that spot where he does some good work, who's doing it even better.
Hmm.
So I just want to ask, like, who would you recommend that's better than Glenn Greenwald as a journalist?
I'm not saying that you shouldn't listen to Glenn Greenwald or don't read his stuff. I'm not. It's not me saying like,
Okay.
like, oh well, like
Yeah.
no one should like boycott Glenn Greenwald right now. Whatever. It's just this is for me personally. Like
Okay.
I just don't find any value in a lot of the stuff that he has to say because it's a lot of the stuff that has already been said. Go to Whitney Webb because as far as just like the stuff that he covers, she probably covers a lot better and more in depth, like 100%.
Hmm.
So it's just to me, it's like it's because he'll say things after the fact, or like when it's safe to say something, or like he'll take on an issue that he knows will get him like some sort of I don't know. It's just weird the way he moves. Like I've observed him for quite some time. I don't really pay much attention to him anymore. I'm not over here trying to say like we need a crusade against Glenn Greenwald. I'm just saying I don't fucking like the guy. So that's my opinion. So
Hmm.
yeah, that's where I'm at.
Yeah.
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 But I'm not. But as far as like you said, someone that I would recommend probably Whitney Webb. As far as the kind of stuff that he discusses, like surveillance and stuff like that. But Alison McDowell is probably one of my favorite journalists. I know people have issues with her, but as far as like covering things from like just like a global perspective and in detail, like excruciating detail, and kind of giving you like different rabbit holes that you can kind of saunter through. I would say Alison McDowell is probably, if not my favorite, one of my favorite people as far as information and analysis.
Okay. So you think that these people go a step further in like what the area that Glenn Greenwald covers, like what he talks about, like you prefer journalists that go into more depth with
Mm-hmm.
the issues and who don't have, I guess, don't have as much dirt from their past and
I mean,
have not evolved
or who have like at
so
least,
much.
or you can at least like address the stuff that you said in the past, right? Like at least address
Okay.
it. So it's not like it's not no one has to be perfect all the time. Of course, maybe he was writing that stuff and he wasn't really thinking about what he was, or he's changed his mind. But at least address it.
Yeah.
Because I've never seen anyone ask him questions. He goes on Jimmy all the time. Never really heard any questions about that. He doesn't really get any questions about like, well, why did you stay at the Intercept for so long? Like, why did all these people get arrested? Like, what's going on?
Hmm.
It's just more
Yeah,
like, oh, this is the
that's
greatest
something to
journalist. It's
consider.
like, is it? Is that the greatest journalist? Is it? Is Glenn Greenwald the greatest journalist? Like, give me a break. You know, it's that's just where I'm at. But
Hmm.
again, that's my opinion. I'm sure people have different opinions, or maybe they find value in Glenn Greenwald, but I do not. So
Hmm. Yeah, because for a lot of people, it's like what the best that they've seen is Glenn Greenwald. They don't know. They probably don't know Whitney exists or haven't looked that deep into her work, or have looked deeply into like Alison McDowell, like you mentioned,
mm-hmm,
or looked into like Moon of Alabama.
mm-hmm.
So
Yeah,
I
Moon of
think it's just that
Alabama.
they
I was
don't
just
know that. Yeah, like they don't know
mm-hmm.
that they exist. So how can we get some of these people who the best that they've seen is Glenn Greenwald? How can we get them to look more
Well, can I
into
just
these
ask
other
like
journalists?
why do you think it is that people even think that he is the best that they've seen? I'm curious. Like from your point of view, why do you think that Glenn Greenwald is what people perceive to be the best that they've seen?
Um, Based off of like if they present if he releases information that like exposes what the US does like with their imperialism and stuff, and they're like, damn, like this is all I'm seeing, like I don't see any other journalists covering this in this much depth.
Mm-hmm.
But then like you can be like, oh, I've seen this other journalist go even deeper than Glenn Greenwald.
Mm-hmm.
um, or I don't know, how would you recommend like telling
Yeah.
people like,
Well, I was
oh,
gonna
this
say like I
person
don't
does better work?
because a lot of the stuff that he says, it's like stuff that people. Well, maybe it's just me, but it's like stuff that you're pretty aware of already. Like to me, like he doesn't really say anything that extraordinary that I haven't heard before.
Yeah.
that hasn't been said by like whether it be like the indie, like super indie media people, or just like in general, like it's common, or maybe because I'm like uh, I pay attention to this stuff, so I have a different insight into it. So maybe he is good for people that don't really pay attention to these things. So perhaps that's what it is. But I just don't like. It's very strange to me. I just
Yeah.
um
It's
yeah.
because they
That's
compare it to like mainstream media, and then they say, "Oh, this guy's calling out mainstream
exact.
media."
Okay,
So
so that's
then that's
exactly what it is. Like so, relatively speaking, he's great, right? If
yeah,
you compare him to mainstream media, but what does that
yeah.
really mean? It's like they're so garbage.
It's a low
It's a
bar
low bar. It's a
to
very low
mainstream media.
bar.
Yeah,
Yeah. So
yeah.
it's just yeah, that's just where that's I think that's probably what it is. It's just they're
Mm.
comparing it to mainstream, which is so terrible that they're like, okay, like oh this is great. It's like all right, well, there's stuff that's a lot better, or not better, but maybe more in depth.
Mm.
But yeah,
I can
I
see.
honestly haven't been paying attention to what Greenwald has been talking about as of recent. I just know that he was complaining about Antifa, um, and I'm sure there's stuff to complain about with Antifa. I'm not saying that it's like an innocent group or whatever, but it's just more it's just the culture war stuff. It's so boring. It's so boring to me.
Mm.
It's like it's like
People
can
are
you
moving on from that
yeah,
now. So it's like, bro, like, why are you still talking? It's so divisive. Like,
it
focus
is.
on more, focus on like what the U.S. empire is doing to other countries. Focus on what the U.S. empire is doing to its own citizens
Yeah.
and civil liberties and all that.
Hmm.
And all these billionaires and how shady they are, and how surveillance is being ramped up. Like there's other issues that we can talk about, or solutions, like what's the best path forward? How can we depower the corporations? Which methods are the best methods forward? Is there a problem with too much direct action? Is direct action the best thing we can do? Like that's stuff that we should start focusing more on, rather than something that's going to be divisive with like your own neighbors,
Exactly.
that you have more in common, and then the
Yeah. I mean, you can point
politicians
out
that people
and
stand for
you can
sometimes.
point but sorry to interrupt. But
That's
you
all
that
right.
doesn't mean that you don't have to point out like if something does seem off, you know? Like just because someone is also a content creator like you or might have a smaller channel or, you know, what have you, it doesn't mean that like you have to like for sake of like, you know, staying I guess cordial or staying friendly and not wanting to like rock the boat or have like any kind of you know friction. It doesn't mean it doesn't mean that you can't point out certain things that maybe are wrong that you see. Like
Mm-hmm.
another example, like people don't like this, but I mean, Gray Zone is another one where I do think that they do like really great researched, like in depth, like pieces, right? And it's awesome, and they do like they cover foreign policy all over the place, like whether it be Eastern Europe, like South America, or you know I think Myanmar, they covered like Myanmar, certain parts of Southeast Asia, but they have ever covered sub-Saharan Africa, ever. Never talked about Africa, never talked about Somalia. And they'll say all the wars, like, oh, we need to get out of Iraq and Afghanistan and Syria and like all this stuff, never mentioned Somalia, which is a problem
Mm.
because because Somalia has been under duress even before Syria and Libya happened. So it's just weird. And if you're like, why wouldn't you mention Africa? Like that's weird. The first time that they ever released an article on it was recently,
Mm.
and it was a very well researched. Like some of the framing
Who
was weird, but it was a great
who covered
article.
it?
It was another guy that they had come in. I guess that
Okay.
they had right for. Yeah, so it wasn't like Ben or Max or any of them, but it was somebody else that they had right for Gray Zone, and they wrote about Somalia. But that was the first time that I ever saw. And how many times did Donald Trump drop, you know, or do drone strikes in Somalia? It
Mm-hmm.
was like it was an insane amount. I think it was like 200 and something times in like 2 years, you know. And he loosened the rules of engagement, where
Yeah.
like they were able to attack more people because I think it was like, oh, anybody who looks like they're 25 and you know of military age, like you can engage. Essentially, he just like loosened it, so they really didn't have anything to say um, about that. So I just thought that was odd. It's like, well, why?
Hmm.
That's
Yeah.
like 1.3 billion people. That like, how come? What's up? What's going on? But
Yeah.
no one
I'll
really
go.
answers. Yeah.
Yeah. That's interesting. You mentioned that. Like I'll go check to see like Somalia, like on their search to see if they like brought it up, or
Mhm.
Africom. But yeah, like like have people will check for themselves, like have they, and why haven't they? Is there a genuine reason? Like is it because they're not they just don't have enough time,
Mhm.
because they're focused on in-depth research on other stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah,
But
I
if you're
mean,
covering every single region and you're like
yeah.
leaving one part out, it's kind of weird. It's
Hmm.
like it's weird. And I mean, I've never really heard Jimmy talk about it either until very recently, where I think he brought up like the strikes in Somalia or whatever. And I'm not saying that he has to cover everything. And this isn't me saying like, well, why isn't he covering the things I think are important? Like, it's not that, but it's just kind of weird considering like the fact that the U.S. sent Green Berets to Mozambique back in March, and there's really not been a peep except for Danny Jerson, who went on Facts on the Ground to talk about it with Jesse. So it's or he'll like I think he talked about the Congo too and all these things, but it's like if like as soon as you see Green Berets are being deployed somewhere, you should be paying attention. That's an operation. The only time they ever get sent is for special operations. It'd be like the statements like Navy, the SEAL Team 6 or like Army Delta Force. Like it's you have to look into the 127 Echo programs because that's how they build like these proxy armies. So it's because I saw that in March and I'm like, what's going on? Like Green Berets, like that's weird. Like that should be an automatic like if you cover foreign policy, that's an automatic red flag. If you cover anti-imperialism, that's an automatic red flag. But because it happened in Mozambique, just no word. And I'm not making this like a racial thing. I don't think it's because they are racist or what. It has nothing to do with that. But I just do find it very odd that those things don't get mentioned. So.
Well, if I ever get the chance, I'll ask them about it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, what? Like, why aren't you covering these issues? Is it because you don't have time,
Mm-hmm.
or is there some other motive?
Yeah,
I'll take
I mean
it. I'll take
they
it into
cover
account.
they cover the other stuff. What? Um, how many times? Like a week? They talk about Syria every week. Not because Syria. And I'm not saying like, oh, why are they only talking about Syria? But it's like you've been covering this like every week, all the time. Is there nothing else going on outside of Syria? And that's not to say that it's not an important topic, but there's a shit ton of stuff going on. So it's it. I'm just trying to understand. Like, help me understand because yeah, it just seems odd because there's a shit ton of stuff going on
Yeah.
outside
Yeah.
of like the approved topics in the paradigm that they have manufactured for us to discuss. Like, and for me, like I don't operate that way. Like if I think something different about a certain thing that's being discussed, that like I'm not gonna just sit there and be like, oh, okay, well, yeah, they're probably right. No, I'm gonna verify it for myself. So yeah.
Yeah. If if there ever is something like that, I personally can't cover. Like for example, I'm just saying like for myself. Like I don't know if the gray zone does this, but I think one thing that people could do, like if they're getting the criticism that, oh, you're not covering like enough issues, why aren't you covering this? I could just be like, I'm sorry, I don't have enough time. I don't know enough about that. I could probably bring somebody on. Thank you for recommending that. Or like if I just never have the time to cover an issue, I can just be like, I recommend looking at this other source that does focus and specialize on that region.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know. I would do that personally. I'd just be
Yeah,
like, hey,
absolutely.
check
Or
out
that
that
too.
guy.
Like,
They're
yeah, check
doing a
out.
great job.
Yeah,
Covering
exactly.
it.
That's a good idea too. I'm not saying that they have to be an expert on every single region, and that they like, or that it doesn't take away from like the great work that they have done. Right? That's not what I'm saying. It's more just like if you call yourself a geopolitics like expert, or and when you understand how the globe works and like all these interactions and whatever, but you leave out all of sub-Saharan Africa. To me, it's like, okay, well, why?
Yeah.
Because if you're talking about South America, you're talking about Southeast Asia, you're talking about Eastern Europe. Like, why would you leave 1.3 billion people who live in sub-Saharan Africa out, especially when there is a shit ton of military involvement over there with AFRICOM?
Yeah. Yeah, like I said, if I ever get the chance, I'll ask. And I'll check to see if they ever have covered it.
Mm-hmm.
But which journal outlets are covering Sub-Saharan Africa?
Oh, yeah, I would say probably Black Agenda Report.
Yeah.
I think you get Black Alliance for Peace. They do a lot. Hood Communist. Hood Communist covers a lot of the issues that happen down there. So I would say check those 3 out. We do pretty good work.
Yeah. And then some of these, I know Black Agenda Report does. They have covered like China, like they cover
Yeah, they
other
cover a lot.
regions.
Yeah,
Are
they
there
cover a
any
lot of
regions
regions.
that they leave out?
Probably not. Black Agenda Report?
Yeah.
No, I think they cover pretty much like Middle East, South America, Central, Africa, Asia. Not really sure. Maybe they might not cover Australia, but I think I was thinking more like the global South without
the
like
oppressed nations.
I want to. It's just more like the targeted, like like just
the targeted areas.
Yeah, like the targeted areas.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What about like smaller content creators, like that are still learning? Like I personally still have a lot to learn. Like you just like for me, and I'm sure for a lot of people in the audience, like like a lot of the information that you gave is like new to me.
I would say the Convo Couch. They're pretty, like, I definitely like shout out to the Convo Couch like every time, just because like they're pretty good about being like well-rounded as far as putting out information, especially on foreign policy. Yeah, they have. Yeah, they had Philmon on.
Ethiopia.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, I like the ones, that, because we have to also understand, some of them, like for example me, like I didn't know everything. The ones that I would base my information off of at the time, I watched a lot of Kyle Kalinske and Jimmy Dore, and Nico House. So a lot of where I came from just that. And then as I talked to more of my audience, I started learning more about other outlets like Last American Vagabond, Whitney Webb. And so that expanded my knowledge. So I think with like smaller content creators, some people got to be, more understanding of where they're coming from. There's not enough that they know yet, but they can learn over time.
Absolutely.
So it just comes down to genuineness, sincerity, and, do they come from a good place? Are they meaning well?
Yes.
When they, try to present the information as best as they can.
Mm-hmm. No, you're right. And I think that another thing, like just like to add on to what you were saying, like everybody's learning, right? Like I'm not perfect. I don't have everything right. I don't know I don't know all the things. You know what I mean? I'm just saying, like, from what I'm observing, right? But at the same time, it's like if someone does approach you, or people say, "Oh, well, you're not covering this or you're not covering that," it's like for the response to be like, "Well, make your own show." It's like, okay, you can say that, or maybe you could be like, "Okay, like, am I missing something? Maybe this person has a point." But to just kind of dismiss them as like, "Oh, well, that's just a troll," or like, "Oh, this person's just like trying to dictate how I do my show." It's like, okay, well, but like if we're all trying to figure this thing out, like just to kind of dismiss the person as like, well, make your own show, or like write your own shit. It's like it's not very kind, number one, and it's also it doesn't show any humility. You know what I'm saying?
It's not the best answer to give.
Yeah.
Like you can just be like, where can I find more information on this? Or you can say, sorry, I'm currently dealing with a lot on my plate, so I can only cover the ones that I feel most comfortable covering because I know the most in these issues. But if there's others that are covering it, then, let me know and I can recommend it for people.
I mean, it's the same thing, right? Where people were like, who were trying to get the bigger platforms to cover Julian Assange, right? People will be in their chat like, hey, can you cover this? Can you cover this Assange? Can you cover this? And it's like, okay, like I have no problem with that because you believe in that cause. Like you think that's important, right? So you approach people about it. It's the same thing. Like just because it's not exactly that, it's not the Assange thing or, something else, it doesn't mean that like if you do the same thing because you want to get the larger content creators to cover the things that you think are important. So if somebody else is doing that to you, like have the same courtesy that you would want that other person to have for you. Yeah. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it's not like it's not about, oh, like this person's just trolling me or like, they just like they're trying to dictate how I do things. Sometimes it's not about that. So
yeah, it's just the issue is really important to them. They want more people to know about it, and the person has that platform. And some to say like, go make your own platform. It's kind of like the response I was getting when I was in DC. They're like, "Well, what have you done?
Yeah.
What
Oh,
have
I
you
saw
done? Like,
that.
why don't you
Yeah,
run for office?" And it's like
I saw
some
that.
people don't have time to be doing, like, people have like 9 to 5 jobs and all that. Some people just don't have the personality or energy or passion to be running for Congress, or some
Or
people think
money,
that it's a
or
waste
yeah,
because they see that everybody who runs sells out. We're working class people. We don't have the platform. We don't have the time. So
yeah,
it's kind of unfair to criticize people and be like, well, why don't you do it?
yeah.
Right?
It's like,
It's like telling somebody, like, I didn't like that movie. Well, you make a better
yeah,
one.
then make a better
Like,
one. Exactly.
with what? Like, I'm not a director. I don't have the resources. Like,
Like
come on.
what?
Yeah.
It's just like a little silly, but I don't know, I think it literally just comes down to like, and I'm not even the best at this every time. Like I know I can be a complete asshole. Like I know this, and I try to do better. I really do, but I think it's just like treat each other with like just as much empathy as possible, regardless of like whether the other person's coming off like a lib, a shit lib, or a right winger. Like it's
Hmm.
just treat them like human beings. That's
Hmm.
all.
So any final messages you want to leave to everybody who's watching?
Um, no, I mean, I think we've pretty much covered it. I guess I'll just go ahead and say, I'm not a NATO shill. So just to clarify that, I'm not a liberal. I don't work for the State Department. Don't have any association with that. This is just like my views. Just in case you get the the pro government people in your comments. Just want to put that out there.
All right, Seb
Yeah,
Solomon, thank you very much for being on the show.
yeah. Thank you
You
for
can
having me.
find her at Red Sea Cactus, and one more time, you can find her on Medium. Her journal outlet is called Solar Tsunami, right?
Solar Tsunami is my moniker.
All right,
Yeah,
Seb, thank you very much for being on the show, and everybody else,
thank
don't
you.
forget to stay informed. Take care, everyone.